So in this segment, we're going to be talking about the UK chemical sector hit by £2 billion worth of red tape, and one of the main issues is the need to. It's like a duplication of regulatory adherence. So they have to kind of apply to two different databases, two different regulators: the EU REACH program, which deals with chemicals, and the UK REACH program, which is creatively named to register their chemicals. So the chemical sector faces £2 billion worth of post-Brexit red tape, twice the cost of the initial industry estimates. And I wonder why it's so much higher. It's very interesting that it's double. This is as Britain sets up its own regulatory regime. Ministers have warned. Truss and Sunak have promised to axe EU red tape. But the problem is the more red tape you axe domestically, the more you create internationally. The more red tape that exporters have to deal with to prove that they haven't taken advantage of the deregulation and that their chemicals still adhere to EU laws, and maybe they have to set up two different kind of conveyor belts, one for the EU and one for the UK. I don't know. This as Britain sets up its own regulatory regime. Ministers have warned. Truss and Sunak promised to axe red tape. The cost of homegrown British red tape after Brexit is mounting, and that's quite a funny way of the author putting this. The cost of homegrown British red tape. Didn't realise the FT were comedians. A government impact assessment report seen by the FT, so someone's leaked this by the looks of it, has put the central estimate of the cost of registering chemicals on a UK database, often duplicating existing registrations with the EU, at £2 billion. So this is effectively just another regulator to jump through. That's what it is, and there's a reason why even certain third countries, they sign up to EU regulators, because it saves them a fortune. And it saves their chemicals a fortune, so they don't have to jump through a new regulator. It's the reason why Norway kind of uses some of the EU regulatory agencies. The chemicals industry last year warned the new regime would cost about £1 billion, but the government now accepts that many more substances will have to be registered than previously thought, and that could be the issue there, that many more substances that go into the actual chemicals will have to be registered, which adds more costs, because you need scientists and other people to actually test this stuff, and most likely it'll have to be peer reviewed as well, because you can't have one set of scientists looking over stuff. That's how you get a dangerous world. The British regime would be far more costly than the EU REACH system. And again, I'm wondering why that is. Is it because we have less access to scientists? What's the situation here? UK companies spent £500 million complying with Brussels regime over the past decade, winning access to 27 markets. And again, 27 markets, that's a lot of countries to sell to. And I think it might be more than 27. You might get some of the EFTA countries, depending on which ones have their own regulatory agencies. A DEFRA spokesperson said it was working closely with the sector and NGOs to find a lower cost solution for the UK's REACH registration. But again, you can't cut that many corners here. This stuff's dangerous, very dangerous. And given the fact that we don't have access to the database anymore, we could have got this as part of the TCA. But the problem is, maybe because we're messing around with the protocol, would the EU have given us access to the REACH databases? I don't know. This ensures high levels of protection for human health and the environment. These chemicals are dangerous. Google things like Roundup. And certain other chemicals, extremely dangerous stuff here. There is a reason why Americans get hit with more sorts of diseases from chemicals than we do in Europe. There's a reason for that. The DEFRA impact assessment implied a £91,000 bill for each substance registered under the UK REACH programme. 22,400 distinct substances would fall within the scope of the new regime, so it's a large cost here for each substance. £91,000, and that's what the chemical agencies are going to have to pay to the regulator to get their stuff registered. That, along with the fact that they have to pay the EU as well. Madness. Ministers are planning to extend the deadline for registering with the UK REACH to spread the cost, but again, they're still going to have to pay it. Just because the cost is spread doesn't mean doesn't mean you're paying less. The requirement for full data sets by at least 2 years until October 2025, so they pushed it back by 2 years. But there is a fear, I think, by the National Audit Office that this might get pushed into 2027. The UK REACH regime has pitted ministers against a broad swath of the manufacturing from chemical companies, because they're going to be quite ticked off here, because they'll promise less red tape, and now, right, to export to the EU, which a lot of these companies will be doing, they're still going to have to adhere to EU law here and adhere to the EU regulators. They're not going to benefit that much unless they set up two conveyor belts, and if they do that, those checks by the EU will be quite stringent. The Chemical Industries Association said it wanted to see robust regulation, but mass and unnecessary re-registering does not equal higher safety and health standards, because if you're going through two different regulators on the same product, it doesn't make the product safer unless one of the regulators picks up something the other one didn't. It won't make things safer. Sunak, the former Chancellor, and Truss have promised to review all retained EU law and scrap excessively onerous rules, replacing it with British regulations. But we've already done that, though. We've already replaced EU legislation with our own. I know I often make the mistake of saying Truss wants to scrap EU rules. It's EU era rules. These have all been put into British law here, so these are effectively British laws that they want to get rid of, as someone like Phil would point out. Many of the benefits of Brexit have yet to materialise 6 years after the vote leave, and isn't it interesting that we can't, when it comes to assessing Brexit, we can't, when it comes to benefits, or when it comes to downsides, they're like, oh, we start from 2016, but when it comes to benefits, what are the benefits of Brexit? It starts from 2020, and then even then we can't see it because of COVID. It's ridiculous. While new border controls have hampered trade and have been blamed for contributing to travel chaos at the port of Dover, he took in 4-hour queues here. Britain will in the medium term be 4% poorer than if it had stayed in the EU, which some Brexiteers are happy to pay, according to the Office of Budget Responsibility, the OBR, knocking off £8 billion off Britain's GDP and £40 billion off the Exchequer receipts. That's £40 billion taken away from the Exchequer. £40 billion they can invest in the economy. That $40 billion could have gone to paying off Test and Tracy. Still would have had enough money to buy Manchester United Football Club. That's how much money these people wasted. The UK chemicals industry initially lobbied for the UK to retain associate membership of the REACH programme, but in the end they didn't do it, warning it could cost the business up to $1 billion for a copycat version. Under EU REACH, chemicals must be registered within the European Chemicals Agency in Helsinki, so shouts out Finland, each accompanied by large amounts of testing and data. So it's clear that maybe it's cheaper for the EU to register chemicals because they've got everything figured out. You've got a strong agency in Helsinki, and they've got a big science team to really get through these chemicals quickly and do it cost effectively, because they have such a large pool of people, a large pool of expertise compared to the UK, which we don't have that many scientists compared to the EU, and they can charge us more to do the registering of these chemicals because there's less of them. During the Brexit negotiations of 2020, the UK failed to negotiate reciprocal access to the database, and I wonder why we didn't get that. It'd be quite interesting to find out why. This left companies facing huge bills to create duplicate sets of data to underpin their UK registration. So again, it's just a massive cost for companies. And we've already spoke about medicines previously, how the EU have authorised more medicines than the UK. And that's partially down to just competence. And some of these pharmaceutical companies aren't even trying to get the medicines registered in the UK until they got the EU bit done first, because they might not have the bandwidth to actually deal with it. Or if there are issues, they can deal with it rather than going through two sets of regulators having issues. They go through one. And unfortunately, the EU's market is far bigger than ours and far more wealthy overall. A report by the National Audit Office said that registrations could be pushed back to 2027. I mean, the question is, will we ever actually get this done? Will we ever actually get this registry done? I don't know if the EU has like a public list. I don't think the database will be public, because otherwise we'll just copy it. But yeah, it's just tragic. The soaring cost of UK REACH emerged after the Treasury admitted last week that the UK's Brexit divorce bill could rise to £42.5 billion, up to £7.5 billion higher than initially estimated. So we've got the cost of the Brexit bill being higher. You've got the chemical agency saying, it's going to cost us £2 billion, not £1 billion, to get the same kind of registration to databases. I'm struggling to see the Brexit benefits here. I'm struggling. I've not heard of too many scandals from the EU's kind of chemical regulatory agency. So us leaving them and having our own system is pure bureaucracy at this point. And I thought we voted Brexit to get rid of bureaucracy and bureaucrats and unelected this and EU that, but evidently, these chemicals, these companies, if they want to sell to the EU, you still got to play ball with the regulator in Helsinki, and if you want to sell stuff in the UK, you got to play ball with the regulator here, and playing ball with both regulators is expensive. It's not cheap, and it's going to be a £2 billion bill that these companies, I'm sure, would rather give to their shareholders or elsewhere, into R&D, but evidently it's not going to R&D or the shareholders. It's going to go to the regulator. It's going to go to the British government to sort all this stuff out, and I don't know how long it will take them. To get this agency on board. This one could be pushed into 2030 for all we know. Maybe it will never happen. I don't know yet. Just like the Northern Ireland Protocol, we'll never implement it fully. I don't know. But anyways, let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe, support the channel on Patreon if you can, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.